Tom and Alice Williams seemed like the perfect couple. High school sweethearts, parents of two, living the American dream in the quiet town of Cedar Brook. But behind their picture-perfect facade, Alice was hiding a secret affair with a charming newcomer named Mark Davis. What started as a few stolen moments soon spiraled into a deadly betrayal. And when Tom discovered the truth, it would set off a chain of events that would leave one of them dead and the other fighting for their freedom. This is the shocking murder behind a wife's secret affair, where passion, deception, and a broken heart led to a deadly end. Tom and Alice Williams had always been the epitome of a perfect couple. They were high school sweethearts who had met during their freshman year and never looked back. After a whirlwind romance, they married young, just after graduating from college. Tom with his steady job as an accountant, and Alice, a former track star with a degree in sports management, seemed like the ideal pair. They quickly settled into their new life in the peaceful town of Cedar Brook, a place known for its charm and tight-knit community. To the outside world, their life appeared flawless. They owned a beautiful two-story home on Maple Street, surrounded by a white picket fence and a lush garden that Alice took pride in maintaining. They had two young children, Emma and Noah, both under the age of 10, who were the light of their lives. Their neighbors often admired how perfect everything seemed, how well they balanced their family, careers, and social life. The Williams family attended church every Sunday, held summer barbecues in the backyard, and were the go-to couple for local charity events. But beneath the surface of their idyllic life, things weren't as perfect as they appeared. The cracks began to show gradually. Tom had become consumed by his career. His work as an accountant for a prestigious firm required long hours, frequent business trips, and weekend commitments. While Tom was busy climbing the corporate ladder, Alice found herself at home, isolated and unfulfilled. She had given up her dreams of working in sports management after having kids, choosing instead to stay home and raise a family. But as the years passed, she began to feel the weight of the decision. The love and attention Tom once showered on her had dwindled, replaced by his growing obsession with work. They seldom spent time together anymore. Their conversations revolved around mundane topics: bills, grocery lists, and what the children needed for school. Gone were the passionate discussions, the late-night walks, and the laughter that had once defined their relationship. Alice, feeling emotionally neglected, began to withdraw into herself. She spent hours alone, staring out the window, watching life pass by. At first, Alice filled the void with friendships. She joined a local book club and volunteered at the children's school, hoping to reconnect with something outside of the walls of her home. But as the months went by, these distractions weren't enough. She began to notice the way men looked at her when she went out, the attention she had once enjoyed before becoming a wife and mother. It was flattering, even if she didn't admit it to herself. She longed for the spark that had once ignited her relationship with Tom, but that flame seemed long extinguished. It was at a local charity gala that Alice first met Mark Davis. He was a recent transplant to Cedar Brook, having moved to the town to open a new branch of his real estate firm. He was charismatic, confident, and, most importantly, he paid attention to her. He listened to her, not just the words she spoke, but the unspoken ones too, the ones about feeling overlooked, forgotten, and invisible. He made her feel alive again. For the first time in years, Alice felt desired, seen, and understood. The chemistry between them was undeniable. Their conversations were filled with flirtation, and before long, the lines between friendship and something more began to blur. What started as harmless flirting soon escalated into secret meetings, stolen glances, and intimate conversations that lasted into the late hours of the night. Alice, caught between guilt and excitement, found herself drawn deeper into the affair. Every moment with Mark felt like a fresh breath of air, a temporary escape from the stifling life she had come to resent. She had fallen into the dangerous trap of emotional infidelity, unsure of where the boundaries between her marriage and the affair had even been drawn anymore. As Alice continued to spend more time with Mark, her relationship with Tom continued to deteriorate. The tension between them was palpable, though Tom never suspected the reason. He was too distracted by his work, too tired when he came home, to notice the subtle signs of her emotional withdrawal. Alice's world, once carefully constructed around her family, was now shifting, teetering dangerously on the edge of something irreversible. As the weeks passed, Alice and Mark's affair deepened. What had started as a flirtation at a charity gala had blossomed into something more, something neither of them seemed ready to walk away from. They began meeting more frequently, finding excuses to be alone. Mark would send texts that made Alice smile, words that made her feel special in ways Tom hadn't in years. For Alice, the relationship with Mark became a lifeline, something to hold on to in a life that felt increasingly empty and disconnected. But as the affair progressed, so did the guilt. Alice was no longer able to hide the strain in her marriage, though Tom remained blissfully unaware. She began to avoid him more often, citing work commitments or spending time with the kids as reasons to retreat into other rooms of the house. She started making up small lies to cover her tracks. Late dinners with friends that didn't happen, trips to the grocery store that turned into hours-long detours, and even claiming she was too tired to go out with Tom on weekends. Despite her growing sense of guilt, Alice justified the affair. She convinced herself that she wasn't being unfaithful in the traditional sense. She hadn't actually left Tom. She still loved him in her own way, but she had simply found a connection with someone who made her feel alive again. In the back of her mind, though, Alice knew she was walking a dangerous path. She could feel the consequences beginning to loom over her, like a storm cloud. The entire group sighed. What was once thrilling, the secrecy, the stolen moments with Mark, was now becoming a pressure she could hardly bear. And then came the first warning sign. One evening, after a particularly heated argument with Tom over dinner, Alice found herself at the kitchen table, wiping away tears. Tom had grown distant, accusing her of neglecting him and the family. He complained about her absence, how she never seemed to be present anymore. His words stung, but Alice, in her turmoil, responded defensively. Tom didn't know the full story, and in that moment, she almost told him, but something stopped her. Fear, perhaps, or the overwhelming sense of self-preservation that had taken hold of her. Alice's heart raced as she realized just how close she was to unraveling her carefully constructed life. That night she met Mark at a small cafe outside of town, where they could talk without fear of being seen. Mark sensed something was different. He saw the weight on Alice's shoulders and knew the affair was beginning to fray at the edges. But he reassured her that they would find a way out. He promised they would build a future together, one where they didn't have to hide anymore. It was a tempting thought, one that made Alice feel momentarily hopeful. However, back at home, the cracks in her marriage were beginning to show in other ways. Tom, though unaware of the affair, started acting differently. He became suspicious. He noticed Alice's increasing absences, her distracted demeanor and the way she kept her phone face down whenever he was around. He began to feel something shift between them, an unspoken tension, a sense that something was off. His usually calm demeanor turned to irritability. He questioned Alice more than he had before, accusing her of withdrawing, of shutting him out. His frustration only made her pull away further. As the tension grew, so did Alice's anxiety. She could no longer ignore the warning signs that her affair had pushed her marriage to a breaking point. But the danger of getting caught wasn't the only thing Alice feared. It was the realization that her double life was unsustainable. Every day was a balancing act. She spent hours trying to hide the truth, hoping that somehow Tom would never find out. She wasn't prepared for the day when everything would come crashing down. It all began with a simple message, a text that Alice had forgotten to delete. It was from Mark. It wasn't overtly suggestive, but it was enough to plant a seed of doubt in Tom's mind. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I miss you." That message, innocent as it seemed, would be the first crack in the facade she had worked so hard to maintain. The message didn't just shake Alice to her core, it rattled Tom, too. He stared at it for hours, his mind racing. Who was this person? What was going on? The question that had been quietly lingering in the back of his mind now shouted at him with undeniable clarity. He had to know the truth, no matter the cost. He couldn't let Alice slip further away. But Alice, too deep in her web of lies, had no idea that the walls were closing in. The secret she thought she was keeping so well hidden was about to be exposed in a way neither of them could have ever imagined. It didn't take long for Tom to piece things together. After that unsettling message, his suspicions only grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Alice. He started paying closer attention to her behavior. When she left, when she came back, who she talked to on the phone. It was subtle at first, just little signs that didn't seem to add up. But then, the cracks began to deepen. One evening, Tom returned home early from a work trip. Alice wasn't expecting him. He walked into the house to find it eerily quiet, the children already in bed, the usual warmth of their home replaced by an unsettling stillness. As he passed by the hallway, he saw something that froze him in his tracks. Alice's phone, sitting on the kitchen counter, face up. The screen lit up, displaying a new message from Mark. Tom's heart pounded as he walked closer. He stood there, frozen, staring at the phone for several moments. The message was clear, and it confirmed every doubt he had been harboring for weeks. "I can't stop thinking about you. I'll be waiting for you tonight." The words stung like a physical blow. For a moment, Tom couldn't breathe. His mind raced, replaying every moment he had spent with Alice, every argument, every cold silence. All of it suddenly felt like a lie. He didn't know what to do, didn't know how to process the overwhelming rush of emotions that came crashing over him. Anger, betrayal, hurt. He picked up the phone, his fingers trembling. He wanted to throw it, destroy it, but he stopped himself. He had to understand the extent of Alice's betrayal. He knew he needed to confront her, but his heart was so full of rage that he wasn't sure he could control himself. He sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the phone in his hands. He was consumed by thoughts of the life they had built together, the years of marriage, the children they had raised, the future they had dreamed of. All of it seemed like a lie now. Tom spent the next few hours in a haze. He couldn't think straight. His mind went into overdrive, playing out different scenarios, different ways to confront Alice. He knew he had to be careful. If he confronted her too soon, if he allowed his emotions to get the best of him, he might lose control. He didn't want to do anything he couldn't take back. When Alice finally came home, Tom was waiting for her in the living room, the phone still in his hand. She didn't notice him at first. She was tired, distracted, trying to unwind after a long day. But as soon as she saw the look in Tom's eyes, something in her shifted. She knew something was wrong. Tom didn't waste time. He threw the phone down on the coffee table and looked at her with cold eyes. "Is this what you've been doing behind my back? Is this the life you've been living while I've been out working, providing for this family?" Alice's stomach turned. She knew deep down that the moment Tom found out was inevitable. She had been careless, but now that the truth was staring her in the face, she was paralyzed. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The shame, the guilt, all of it hit her like a tidal wave. Tom's voice cracked with anger. "Who is he, Alice? Who have you been lying to me about? Who have you been spending your nights with?" His tone was low but filled with raw emotion, a mixture of disbelief and fury. Alice wanted to explain, wanted to tell him the truth, everything about Mark, everything about why she had sought affection elsewhere. But the moment she tried to speak, the words felt hollow, inadequate. How could she explain to the man she had built a life with that she had fallen in love with someone else? How could she tell him that she had been so desperate for attention, so desperate to feel alive again, that she had betrayed everything they had? Tom didn't give her the chance to speak. His anger grew, swelling in his chest like a volcano on the verge of eruption. He could feel the betrayal sinking in deeper with every passing second. His hands clenched into fists as he struggled to keep his composure. His mind was no longer thinking clearly. He didn't know what to do, what to say. All he knew was that the woman he had loved for so long, the woman who was supposed to be his partner, had shattered everything. Alice finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Tom, I never meant for it to happen. It just did. I'm sorry. I didn't know how to stop." But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Every apology felt empty. Every explanation seemed like a weak excuse. Tom couldn't hear it anymore. He had been betrayed, not just by Alice, but by the life he thought they had built together. The pain was unbearable, a searing, gut-wrenching agony that clouded everything else. And as the silence between them thickened, a chilling realization settled over Tom. His world was no longer what he thought it was. The affair, once a secret, was now out in the open. But the worst part was yet to come. Neither of them knew it yet, but this confrontation would set off a chain of events that neither Alice nor Tom could undo. The path they were on was leading somewhere dark, and there would be no turning back. That night, the house felt like a stranger's home. The warmth was gone. Alice and Tom stood in a tense silence, their once comfortable space now fraught with unbearable tension. Tom's anger was palpable, like a storm cloud hanging overhead, threatening to burst at any moment. Alice, on the other hand, was overwhelmed with guilt, shame, and fear. She had never imagined things would go this far. She'd never anticipated the moment when her actions would lead to such devastating consequences. The confrontation had started with accusations, but now it was spiraling into something more dangerous. Tom, struggling to hold onto his composure, couldn't bear to look at Alice anymore. He had trusted her, loved her, and in a single moment, everything had been shattered. His mind raced through memories of their life together. Happy moments, shared dreams, promises made. And it all felt meaningless now. What was the point of all of it if Alice had been lying to him, betraying him in such a profound way? How long?" Tom's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air like a weighted threat. He wasn't sure if he wanted to know, but it slipped out anyway, desperate and guttural. Alice couldn't meet his gaze. Her heart hammered in her chest, and she felt as though the walls were closing in on her. She had to say something, to explain herself, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time in years, she felt utterly powerless. She had pushed Tom so far, and now there was no way to take back what had been done. "It's not like you think, Tom," she began, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you." Tom let out a bitter laugh, a sound that felt foreign even to him. "You never meant to hurt me." He paced, his anger growing with each step. "How do you think this feels, Alice? How do you think it feels to find out that everything we've built together, everything we've shared, has been a lie? How long were you planning on keeping this from me? How long were you going to keep pretending we were a family?" Alice's stomach twisted. She knew the words weren't enough. No amount of apologies or justifications could undo the damage. She could feel it now, the terrifying weight of what she had done. She had not just betrayed her husband, but also herself. In her pursuit of excitement, of feeling wanted again, she had destroyed the one thing she had promised to protect above all else. In a sudden, violent flash of rage, Tom grabbed the nearest object, a heavy glass paperweight from the desk by the front door, and slammed it down onto the coffee table with such force that the sound echoed through the room. Alice flinched, terrified. She had never seen Tom like this before. His face was red, his fists clenched, his entire body trembling with fury. "Tell me the truth, Alice. I need to know everything," Tom demanded, his voice low and threatening. "Who is he? Who is the man you've been seeing behind my back?" The question hit Alice like a slap. She had never intended for things to go this far, but now that they had, she couldn't lie anymore. Her affair with Mark had become a tangled mess she no longer knew how to navigate. She had tried to keep it from Tom, tried to keep her two worlds separate, but there was no hiding anymore. She had been caught, and the consequences of her actions were only beginning to unfold. The creature removed its legs. "His name is Mark," Alice whispered, barely able to speak above a breath. He's been someone I've been seeing for the past 6 months." Tom stood there, frozen. His mind was reeling, processing the words in real time, and the magnitude of the betrayal was too much to bear. 6 months. It was the length of an entire season, a full cycle of life that had passed without his knowledge. He had been living a lie for half a year. And Alice, the woman he thought he knew better than anyone, had been hiding this secret from him, pretending everything was normal while sharing herself with someone else. Tom could feel his anger turning into something darker, something colder. A mix of disbelief and disgust twisted in his gut. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Alice, a wave of fury sweeping over him. "How could you?" he whispered, voice strained. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Alice tried to speak again, to explain the emotions that had driven her to this point, but Tom cut her off. "I don't want to hear it," he spat, his words like venom. "You've said enough. This is beyond fixing." The room felt suffocating, the silence between them almost unbearable. Tom wanted to shout, to break something, to do anything to release the anger that was building inside him. But more than anything, he wanted Alice to understand the devastation she had caused. not just to their marriage, but to him as a person. No. He turned away, pacing in circles as the adrenaline surged through his body. He couldn't stay in the same room with her. Not now. Not while the pain was so raw. He needed space. He needed time to think. But what Tom didn't know was that this confrontation, this breaking point, was about to trigger something much worse. As Alice stood there, trembling, she knew that she was at the edge of a precipice, and everything she had done had led her to this moment. There was no turning back now. There would be no easy solution to this mess. And yet, the truth was more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Tom spent the next several hours pacing, trying to shake off the chaos that had erupted in his home. His mind raced through 1,000 different scenarios, each one more painful than the last. He didn't know what he was looking for. Answers, maybe, or some way to understand how his life had been derailed in such a short amount of time. Alice, meanwhile, sat in the living room, paralyzed by a cocktail of guilt and dread. She had always been able to talk her way out of things, to make people understand her side of the story. But this was different. There was no explaining away what she had done. Tom had seen the evidence with his own eyes. Her betrayal was undeniable, and now they were both trapped in a nightmare of their own making. As the hours passed, Tom eventually stormed out of the house, leaving Alice alone to sit in the silence, trying to gather her thoughts. Her heart raced with fear, not just for her marriage, but for what might come next. She had no idea what Tom was capable of in this state. She had never seen him so enraged, so completely lost in the rush of emotion. He had always been the calm one, the rock, while she had been the one to float through life, impulsive and carefree. But now, the imbalance had shifted, and Alice feared that the storm had just begun. When Tom returned home later that night, his face was cold and set in stone. He had made up his mind, and Alice could see it in the way he held himself, in the way he barely looked at her. There was a deep resolve in his eyes, but it was not the resolve of a man seeking reconciliation. It was the resolve of a man who had been irreparably hurt. Tom knew he could never go back to the way things were. The trust had been broken beyond repair, and no amount of apologies or explanations could fix what had been shattered. The following day, Alice woke up to a house that felt as if it belonged to someone else. Tom had already left for work, but the damage was evident. The tension from the night before still lingered in the air, like a heavy fog that wouldn't lift. Alice tried to shake the feeling, tried to convince herself that it wasn't too late to salvage their relationship, but deep down, she knew the truth. The affair, the lies, the secrecy, it had all been building up to this moment. There was no going back. Over the next few days, Tom and Alice barely spoke. The children were oblivious to the storm that had hit their home, but even they could sense that something was wrong. The house felt quieter, emptier. Tom spent most of his time away, either at work or on long drives to nowhere, avoiding the confrontation he knew would eventually come. Alice, for her part, didn't know what to say anymore. Every time she opened her mouth, her words felt hollow, inadequate, like she was trying to patch up a wound that was far too deep to heal. Then, one afternoon, everything came to a head. Tom came home early, his face grim and unreadable. Alice knew what was coming before he even said a word. She could see it in his eyes, in the way he held himself. The moment of reckoning had arrived. "Alice," Tom said, his voice calm but chillingly controlled. I've been thinking a lot, and I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." She had the instinct. Alice's heart dropped. She tried to speak, to say anything that might stop him from doing what she knew he was about to do, but the words caught in her throat. Tom was already too far gone. He had made his decision. "I'm done," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, but it felt like a thunderclap. I can't stay here. I can't stay with you. Not after everything that's happened. Alice felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. She had prepared herself for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the devastation of hearing it out loud. She had always known that if Tom found out, if everything came crashing down, there would be no going back. But hearing the words now, spoken by the man she had once promised to love forever, was a reality she hadn't fully grasped until that very second. The reality she hadn't fully grasped until that very second. A decretalist Tom stood there, his face expressionless. I'm not angry, Alice. I'm not even hurt anymore. I'm just done. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't let himself show more than that. You can have your life with him, with Mark, if that's what you want. But I can't do this anymore. And with that, he walked out the door, leaving Alex standing in the middle of the room, paralyzed. She could feel her world collapsing around her. In the span of a few days, she had lost everything she had ever known. Her marriage, her family, her future. All of it was gone. She had chosen excitement over stability, passion over love, and now she was paying the price. But the worst was yet to come. The emotional devastation Alice felt paled in comparison to the consequences that were about to unfold. Tom's departure was only the first step. Behind closed doors, things were happening that Alice had no control over. The police were quietly investigating. They had been called to the scene after Alice's body was discovered. Tom had been seen leaving the house earlier that night, and the evidence they found would soon paint a picture that no one could have predicted. The truth was out, but the ramifications were only beginning to unfold. Alice's affair had set off a tragic chain of events that no one, least of all Tom, had ever imagined. In the end, the murder that followed was as shocking as it was inevitable. The devastating consequences of betrayal had come full circle, and Cedar Brook would never be the same.